Jason and I had built something real. Years of late-night laughter, inside jokes, honest conversations that sometimes got messy. We didn't pretend. We talked about everything, past flings, awkward desires, things most couples are too scared to say out loud. That was our strength. Nothing was off limits. Mark had always been around, Jason's best friend since college. Sarcastic, quiet, never overstepped. He was like a couch, we never moved. Comfortable, familiar. Until I started noticing him noticing me. Not in a dramatic way, not creepy, just a glance that stuck too long. A laugh that lingered when it didn't need to. I don't know when curiosity started replacing comfort, but once it did, I couldn't unsee it. One night, the three of us were playing cards and drinking. Jason went to the kitchen and Mark leaned back, bourbon in his voice. You ever think about how lucky he is? It was half a joke, but his eyes didn't play. I smiled, unsure. To have what? You, he said. Then he laughed it off, but the moment stayed. Later in bed, I almost told Jason, but I didn't have to, he already knew. Mark thinks you're hot, he said casually, like he was reading the weather. I turned. He told you that, years ago, said you were out of his league. I told him I agreed. There was no jealousy, just calm, confidence. Trust so thick it made my chest ache. That night, I lay beside Jason thinking not about Mark, but about being seen, desired. Not acted on, just witnessed. There's a strange kind of power in that. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir that had nothing to do with guilt. Then Jason said something that cracked open a door I hadn't even realized was locked. You ever wonder, what it'd feel like if someone saw us? Just watched? I froze. Watched what? You and me, together. No touching. Just seeing you the way I do. He wasn't joking. Wasn't testing me. Just honest. Why would you want that? I asked, half nervous. Because I think you're beautiful. And because it turns me on, the idea of someone seeing how good we are. How much I love you. It didn't feel sleazy. It felt intimate, deep. Wildly strange. Wildly safe. I didn't say yes. Not then, but the idea stayed. Days passed. Curiosity turned into thought into quiet want. Not for Mark, not exactly, for the power in being seen, for the trust it would take, for the boundaries we'd set and test together. One day on a long drive I asked, if we ever did it, how would it work? Jason didn't flinch. You'd be in control. The second it feels wrong, it ends. He watches. That's it. It's not for him, it's for us. That night I didn't sleep. Not out of fear, out of honesty. Some version of me, buried beneath years of roles and routines, was finally breathing. In the morning, I whispered, okay, he didn't gloat, just kissed my forehead and said, we'll go slow. The night when Mark arrived, he was quiet. Respectful. Nervous even. We'd set the rules. No touching. No speaking unless necessary. He'd stay back. Jason and I started like we always did. Soft, slow, familiar. But everything felt heightened. Every breath, every brush of skin, the awareness that we were being seen made it more real. Not performative. Not fake. Just present. Mark stayed still, silent. His gaze wasn't possessive. It was reverent. Careful, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt powerful, beautiful, claimed. Jason touched me like I was the only thing that mattered. But this time I knew he wanted me to feel it fully. To be seen as something more than routine, more than wife, more than safe. It wasn't about Mark. It was about trust, about a bond strong enough to bend without breaking. When it ended, no one spoke. Mark left with a nod. We stayed in bed, quiet, breathing the same air, raw, connected, changed. Jason held me close, whispered, thank you for trusting me. After the morning after wasn't awkward. It was gentle, slow, like we were learning how to exist again, but stronger. Mark sent a message a few days later. Thank you for trusting me. I respect you both more than ever. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing less. Jason and I talked about it over coffee, about how this wasn't about adding a third. It was about opening a window and still feeling the walls of our love hold firm. Not easy, but honest. We questioned ourselves, then forgave ourselves, then celebrated that we'd done something together, something most people are too scared to even speak of. Not for attention, not for thrill. For us to feel seen, known, trusted, and loved. Deeply, wildly, truly. Because sometimes the bravest kind of love is the one that breaks rules and doesn't break you.
It wasn't the night that changed us. It was the days after. When silence crept in, not because we had nothing to say, but because we were both listening for what the other needed before speaking. I noticed Jason's eyes more, not just the way they looked at me in bed, but in the morning light when I was brushing my teeth or standing at the stove barefoot. He looked softer, like he was seeing the whole of me now. Not just the role I played, but the woman who had trusted him with something fragile and strange. He'd kiss my shoulder in passing and linger just a second longer. Like thank you wasn't over yet, and I wasn't the same either. There was something looser in my chest, like a knot had quietly come undone. Not from Mark watching, not even from the act itself, but from being allowed to want something I didn't yet understand, and not being judged for it. I didn't know how to name it, but I knew it was real. One night, a week later, we sat on the balcony in silence. Jason broke it. Did it feel wrong? He asked gently, not looking at me, but offering me space to say no. No, I said. Just new. He nodded. Do you think about it? Sometimes, so do I. A long pause. What do you think about? I asked. He didn't hesitate. How calm you looked. How beautiful. How in control. How in control. I turned to him, heart quietly pounding. Do you want to do it again? He smiled, small and slow. Only if you do. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was complicated. It wasn't about wanting more. It was about understanding why I might. It wasn't about Mark anymore. He was kind, careful, a shadow who'd asked for nothing and taken even less. But what had happened cracked something open in me. I'd never been wild, never craved chaos. But there was something unspoken I'd always buried, some desire to be seen beyond loyalty and predictability. That night gave it a voice, a permission slip, and Jason, he wasn't threatened, he was present. More than he'd been in years, more than I had been in years. We made love that night without anyone watching, but it felt more, like the ghosts of that experience had sharpened us, made us bolder. I touched him like I was claiming him. He looked at me like he was seeing a sunrise he never realized had been there all along. We didn't talk about inviting Mark again, not right away, but we did start talking more. About fantasies, boundaries, desires we hadn't thought were safe to speak before. There was no rush to repeat anything. There was just truth now, and that was enough. But then something happened that shifted it again. It was a regular night, rain tapping the windows, a movie playing but ignored. Jason's hand on my thigh, casual. He whispered, I keep thinking about how you looked that night. I smiled, leaned into him. I do too. He looked at me, serious this time. What if we did something else? Something that's just ours. No one watching, but not vanilla. My chest tightened. But not with fear, with intrigue. What do you mean? He took a breath. You tell me what you want, anything. I don't ask questions, I just give it to you. I stared at him, half laughing. You trust me that much? I trust you more than that, and just like that, a new door cracked open. This time the fantasy was mine, not his. Not Mark's, mine. I thought long and hard about what I wanted, not what I thought was safe, not what would keep me comfortably in the role of good wife. What did I want? And one night I told him, I want you to tie my hands, not tight, just enough to feel held. I want to be still, to be taken without asking, but only if you look at me the whole time. His eyes didn't blink. You got it. No judgment, no hesitation. Just love, real unshaken love. What followed was the most intimate night of our lives. It had nothing to do with rope or control, and everything to do with trust. I let go, fully. And for the first time, I saw in Jason's eyes the thing I hadn't let him show before, the part of him that had been waiting for me to trust him with more than just routine, more than just safety. I gave him all of me that night, not because I owed it, but because I chose to. And when it was over, he held me like I was breakable, kissed my wrists where the rope had sat gently. We didn't speak. There was no need. In the end, it was never about Mark. Not really. He was the spark, maybe. But the fire, that was always ours. We just needed permission to let it burn. And now here we are, standing in something new, unlabeled, untamed, honest. We're not trying to recreate that night. We're creating us from scratch every time we choose each other. Because love isn't just about staying. It's about showing up fully, desires, doubts, and all, and letting yourself be known. We thought the hardest part was behind us. The watching, the shift, the unspoken truths that finally made it out of the dark. But love doesn't just stretch, it reshapes. And sometimes when you stretch far enough, you realize you've exposed things you weren't ready to see. It started in the quiet moments, not with a fight, not with drama. Just silence that lingered too long between us. Not cold, just thoughtful, hesitant. Jason still kissed me in the mornings, still held my hand under the covers. But something in his eyes was different. Like he was seeing me through a new lens, one that magnified everything, the good, the thrilling, and the now uncertain. One night, I asked, "Are we okay?" He turned slowly. "Yeah, I think so. But you don't sound sure," he nodded. "I guess I just keep thinking about what we've opened up, what it means long term." I leaned against the counter, feeling my chest get heavy. "Do you regret it?" "No," he said quickly. "Not at all. I didn't expect to feel so exposed." Even after, he looked at me like I was a mirror he wasn't sure he was ready to face. "I know you love me. I've never questioned that. But there's this voice in my head now that keeps asking, what if that night changed something I can't see?" He wasn't angry, just human. It wasn't jealousy. It was something more vulnerable, something deeper. It was the fear that the freedom he'd gifted me might grow into a hunger he couldn't keep up with. That maybe the woman he loved, who had always been grounded and loyal, had discovered something inside her that didn't fit the life they'd built. And the thing that gutted me most was that I'd wondered the same. Not because I wanted someone else, but because for the first time in my life, I felt uncontained. Desire didn't feel like a secret anymore. It felt like a language, a power. And once you start speaking it, it's hard to go back to silence. We sat on the floor that night, no distractions, just the hardwood and truth between us. "I don't want anyone else," I said, voice low. Jason looked at me. "But do you want more?" I thought about it carefully, because this mattered more than anything we'd done in bed. "I want us to keep expanding, not because I'm chasing a thrill, but because I don't want to stop being honest." He exhaled slowly, like that truth hurt and healed him at the same time. A week later, Mark called. He'd been quiet since his thank you message. But this time it wasn't casual. "I think I need to say something," he said over the phone, his voice steady but softer than I'd ever heard it. "I'm not trying to intrude. I just want you both to know. I felt something that night. And I've been trying to ignore it, but that would be dishonest. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying it out loud because I respect you too much to pretend." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just thanked him, genuinely, then hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. When I told Jason, he didn't get angry, but I saw something shift in his jaw, a flicker of the boundary we were dancing too close to. And that night he held me tighter, as if to remind us both, this is ours. Everything we'd built was still standing, but the ground beneath was warmer, more alive, more volatile, and we had a choice to make: keep pushing further or step back and re-anchor. Jason asked me one night as we lay wrapped in each other, "Would you ever want to be touched by someone else?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a question from a man brave enough to ask what most would rather bury. I took a breath. "I don't know," I said. Not because I'm not satisfied, but because, for the first time, I don't feel like I have to lie about wondering. He nodded. "That's fair." Then softly, "Would you tell me if you ever did?" I didn't pause. Always. That's what trust looks like now. Not blind, not easy, but open-eyed and earned daily. We haven't repeated that night, haven't asked Mark back, haven't acted on anything new. But we've started asking each other questions we never would have had the courage to ask before. Questions that make your stomach turn and your heart race. Questions that don't always lead to answers, but always lead to truth. And honestly, I think that's more intimate than anything we could do with our bodies. So what are we now? We're partners, lovers, explorers. We're married, yes, but not in the way that most people define it. We're rebuilding a language of love that includes desire, curiosity, insecurity, and permission. And we still sleep in the same bed, fingers laced grateful. Not for what we did, but for what we learned, that love isn't a fence, it's a door. And the bravest thing you can do is decide together which ones you're ready to walk through. We hadn't talked about Mark in weeks, not because we were avoiding it, but because we didn't need to. What we'd shared that night had shifted something, but the dust had settled. And what remained was surprisingly simple: us. Still holding hands at red lights. Still laughing in the middle of folding laundry? Still us, but a version that had seen something wild and come back softer? That Saturday night, the house was quiet. No plans, no distractions. Jason lit a candle without saying a word. Just placed it on the nightstand and turned off the lights. I watched him from the bed, heart slow, steady. There was no rush in his movements. He climbed in beside me, pulled the blanket up, and just looked at me in the dim glow. Not with hunger, not with tension, with something gentler, a reverence that made my throat tighten. His fingers found my wrist, tracing it like he was learning me all over again. "Remember when we first met?" he asked softly. I smiled. "You spilled coffee on me and blamed the barista." He laughed quietly. "And you still gave me your number. You were charming." I was scared, he said, "but you didn't make me feel like I had to pretend." That truth hung in the air between us. Thick, real. He leaned in then, slow, like the kind of kiss that asks permission even when it's already been given 1,000 times. His lips brushed mine, barely there. But it said everything. That we were still choosing each other. Still here, still us. It wasn't wild. It wasn't daring. It was better. It was the kind of night you only get after everything. After the thrill, after the questions, after the shaking of the foundation. It was the rebuild. Jason pulled me on top of him slowly, hands at my hips, no words exchanged. Just breath, just warmth. My hair fell over his face and he moved it gently behind my ear. His eyes locked with mine, no rush, no agenda. "Stay here," he whispered. Not on him, not above him. In that moment. Here. I nodded. Here, I nodded. And I did. We kissed like we hadn't already made love 1,000 times. Like this was new. Like this was sacred. His hands held my waist like I might vanish. I leaned down and kissed his chest, then his neck, then whispered, "I'm still yours." He exhaled like I had lifted something from him he didn't know he was carrying. "I know," he said, "and I'm still yours." When we moved together, it wasn't about friction. It was about recognition, about finding the shape of each other again in a new way, slower, fuller. There were no hard edges, just soft sounds and deeper breaths. And when we came undone, we didn't speak, just stayed tangled, skin on skin, heartbeat on heartbeat. After he held me tighter than usual, not possessive, grateful, like he knew that tonight hadn't been a performance, or a spark, or an answer. It had been a return, back to the core of what made us us. He kissed the back of my neck and whispered, "Thank you for staying." And I whispered back, "Thank you for letting me leave and trusting I'd come back." Because sometimes the strongest love isn't the kind that keeps you close. It's the kind that lets you drift, lets you want, lets you wonder, and still believes you'll choose home.